Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. My friend, Professor Heath Brown from the CUNY Graduate Center and John Jay must be having a busy time right now with Trump, with Donald Trump, with finances, with ethics, and what he's going to do with this election. He's written two books that were very, I don't know if they prophesized what was going to happen. In 2012, Lobbying the New President, and in 2016, Pay to Play Politics. So Heath, what do you think now?
I think I'm so excited to be back to talk about what's going on. I don't think these were prophecies. I think what is going on right now was happening then and has happened in the past. And Donald Trump has exacerbated things and accelerated things. But a lot of the signs were out there in earlier years, and so that's what I've written about. And you're absolutely right that it's filling up a lot of my life right now.
How do you transition the government, and what do you think is going to happen with Donald Trump?
Yeah, so let's go back a little bit further than that. Things really get started in May, and federal law requires the sitting president, whether or not they're running for re-election, to establish a process that prepares for their leaving office. So when they're not running for re-election, that's a fairly obvious process. But when they are, it's a little less obvious. But since May, the White House and people across government have been preparing for the president to lose. Now, you would be hard-pressed to find President Trump talking about that. He's asserted that he's going to win many times. But back in May, they started to prepare. And we know that because they issued a report to Congress that showed all the things that they're doing. Over those months, the Biden campaign has started to prepare itself. And it's done that basically in secret because we have a system that assumes that you don't start until you win. But right now, as we talk, and for the next couple of weeks until Election Day, advisors to Joe Biden will be preparing to do all of the things, assuming that they're going to win. One of the real questions is what Donald Trump is doing, is whether he is fulfilling his side of the bargain, which is to do the rational and necessary and safe things to prepare for a possible loss in November. We don't really know that right yet, but it raises some real questions.
So there are two sides then. And it's interesting to note that the only things I've really seen publicly about a transition has been from the groups, the young people and people basically who supported another candidate, right? Whether it was Elizabeth or somebody else. Anyway, what happens now? They're not just sitting around in the Biden group. They're already selecting people that they think they're going to point to cabinet positions and policies that they're going to adopt. And we saw that right after the primary, when his main opponent dropped out. We understood that there was some kind of agreement between the two of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened about 6 or 9 months ago now is that when Democratic candidates started to drop out of the race, they did so publicly, but many of their advisors, and a part of I think the negotiations as they dropped out, many of their advisors then joined the Biden campaign, not as campaign staffers, but as transition staffers. And what I mean by that is they started to get around in rooms, and it's probably been virtually for the last 7 months, but they've started to do all of those things that are incredibly important after the election. Because when it comes down to it, what an election means is not simply the election of two people, the president and vice president. What it means is the choice of dozens, if not hundreds of people who are going to join the government at various points. And if you were Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or Pete Buttigieg at the time, you wanted your advisors on that team so that the ideas you believe in are going to ultimately get into the next Democratic administration. So what they want is to make sure that their ideas on the Green New Deal or on Medicare for All ultimately are the agenda that the Joe Biden team puts into action. We know bits and pieces of that through the very public campaign promises made by Joe Biden. But I'm really talking about the nuts and bolts and minutia of government, things that most people have never thought about that actually makes up a great deal of governance. That's what they're doing right now, trying to figure out not just who's going to be the next Secretary of the Treasury, but who's going to be the Undersecretary of the Treasury, who's going to be the Deputy Undersecretary of the Treasury, positions that are incredibly important, but none of us ever really know these people's names because they are buried down in the administration. They matter a lot for how policy is actually enacted. And that's what they're doing right now, figuring out people and also ideas. And that's happening in Zoom calls across the country right now. Typically it happens in Washington. Right now it's happening virtually, but it's probably 12 to 16-hour days with the transition team right now.
So interesting. There also must be looking at the different regulations in the departments that Trump has changed and what need to be addressed in a priority of action, don't you think?
You're absolutely right that if no more guiding philosophy of government of the Trump administration has been deregulation. In fact, it has been one of the main things that has defined Donald Trump as a conservative, as opposed to something else. Hundreds of rules and regulations have been undone by the Trump administration over the last 3.25 years, 3.75 years, mainly focused on the environment, workplace safety, environmental safety, and what have you. And I would suspect that the Biden transition team right now is trying to figure out on each one of those rules that have been undone in some fashion, the quickest way to put them back in place. And that's not easy because once the government stops doing something, it takes a longer process to put it back in place. But I suspect that's what they're figuring out right now is which of those things that they've done, and they have done many things to deregulate the government. How can they put many of those regulations and rules back in place? That's the work of experts of the highest degree who know about the tiniest little bits of government that you and I would never hear about because they are involved in a layer of governance that is highly precise. But they're the experts and they know what they're doing.
The one public thing, I guess, that I've read about was Elizabeth Warren with bankruptcy. I think that was a public thing that Biden in his campaign has adopted, right?
Yeah, so at the top line, part of what outgoing candidates will do is to try to get promises. And what they want is public promises. In any campaign, and you know this, there are the promises you make in front of the press, and they're the promises you make not in front of the press. There are more promises made not in front of the press than there are in front, but the ones that show up in the newspaper are the ones that are hardest to break. And so Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and others have tried to get Joe Biden as a candidate to publicly support the things that they campaigned on. It still doesn't bind the winning candidate to do anything, but it makes it much more difficult to have them go back on those promises if they're out there in the public record. And so effective politicians like Elizabeth Warren know, make them get on the record, make them say it in front of a national audience, and the chance of them actually doing it, should they win, increases a lot.
Do you think that there's an investigative group that are investigating those lower echelon employees in different departments that were appointed by the Trump administration?
Yeah.
They have to know at some point who's not going to cooperate with them, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because much of government works not on the political appointees, but on the career bureaucrats.
Thank God for some of them, right? For all of them, basically, today.
This is what Donald Trump is often referred to in quite negative ways as the deep state. But these are the people who work year in and year out, work for Republicans and Democrats. The career bureaucrats are really who make the government run. In a lot of cases, a new administration may want to do certain things, but it will take convincing a large number of people who were not on the campaign, who may not be supporters of the candidate, may not even be in the party of the candidate, but get them to agree that this is the right course of action. This is why presidents' power is more limited than we're led to believe. Presidents don't have a wand that they can wave and get everything they would like. If they did, they wouldn't have to work so hard. In actuality, their agenda is tiny and they have to get it done very quickly. So they have to choose wisely. A new administration is unlikely to get more than 2 or 3 major legislative proposals to move ahead quickly. The rest of it is really stuff at the margins that they can do by executive order, and most importantly, convincing career bureaucrats that a new way of doing things is important. That's really in the weed stuff, but it's very, very important.
I imagine the State Department also is pretty important since our relations with lots of countries have been strained, to say the least. The legislature has to do something similar, doesn't it? The leadership or the assuming leadership of the next House and Senate, they have to begin to prepare if they have the majority in both houses.
Absolutely.
And both parties do that? Or?
Absolutely. So a lot of the preparation, especially for congressional leaders who are pretty confident they're going to win their races, which is, if you're in the leadership, usually a pretty good assumption. Mm-hmm. But all of them are trying to game out the possibilities. And so Republicans are trying to figure out, what would the next year look like if Donald Trump loses, but they maintain the majority in the Senate and continue not to have a majority in the House? What would their agenda look like if that was a scenario? Conversely, what if Donald Trump wins and they maintain control of the Senate? What then could they pursue? And so in each one of those different scenarios, there's a different strategy. And congressional leaders, I would imagine, are working out their strategies given a variety of outcomes. Now, typically, as of the day after the election, we know basically what the next year will look like. This year, this cycle, maybe it's not going to be quite as clear. And it's going to take another 7, 10, maybe a month for us to know ultimately who's going to win the Electoral College, possibly even who's going to maintain the control of the Senate. And so a lot of those plans that are on paper right now may take a little longer for them to actually get out and use.
Did Clinton exclude lobbyists from his transition team?
In a way, he did. The most rigorous rules on lobbying really started in 2008. Previous administrations, when they transitioned in, would sometimes have some loose ethics rules that individuals who served on the transition team would have to agree to, but they were loose and rarely enforced. In 2008, they had some of the most stringent rules put in place that restricted what lobbyists could do during the transition period. So if you were an energy lobbyist in 2008 and you wanted to help the Obama administration transition to power, you could work on the transition team, but you couldn't work on those issues that you'd previously lobbied on. And you'd agree to that. Now, exemptions were given, many of them, but that was basically the working arrangement. In 2016, the Trump transition team paid lip service to a similar approach, but ultimately didn't follow through on limiting the access that lobbyists had to the transition team. Many more lobbyists ultimately served in important positions. Many more had access to the decisions made at the earliest days of the Trump administration. And the consequence for that has been a real major payday for interest groups and lobbyists across Washington who have enjoyed the last 3 3/4 years because they've had enormous, almost unfettered access to government in a way that in the Obama administration they didn't, and to some extent they didn't during the Bush administration as well. So Donald Trump has really taken advantage of and given quite a lot of authority to lobbyists to make some of the most important decisions in government, either by serving in government, that is through being appointed, or through doing the next best thing, which is to advise the person who is appointed. And so many lobbyists has no interest in actually serving in government. The only thing they want is to be able to tell the person serving in government what they should and shouldn't do. Trump administration has empowered those people in a pretty remarkable way.
And then you have not only the transition, but after the president is inaugurated, you have this big celebration that day. And that is not paid for by the government, right?
The inauguration is funded primarily. There are some aspects of it, including the security and some of the planning that's paid for by the federal government. But the parties, the food, the champagne is by and large paid by donations from major supporters.
We see in the Trump administration the direct results of that with all the people that have done it. But let's, we're getting to the end of this program, and I wanted to talk about the role of money a little bit, right? These lobbyists are conveyors of money to the administration, to members of the Congress, to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that demonstrated repeatedly in the New York Times just today. There's a story about information about COVID being released in a private briefing at the White House in February, that the people who were privy to this conversation shared with their friends. Their friends happened to be in the world of finance and just so happened to take advantage in their financial portfolios of the information they got. Now, those weren't lobbyists. Those were people that simply had access to some of the most innermost conversations going on in the White House. They were then individually and financially able to benefit, according to the New York Times, from this information. That access is what you get when you support a candidate during a campaign. It's the access that you get when you support their inauguration. It's the access that you the payday that you get for being so supportive of a candidate. And sometimes it's a little hard to figure that out, and other times it's boldly clear what you get. And I think this story in the New York Times this week is an indication of that.
And in addition to that, Trump is able to make money on these people by having them trying to curry favor by going to his hotels and buying his products or whatever he still has on the market. Isn't that the first time? I guess the public officials who've been elected and other people can reap back their money when they write a book. I've always wondered about these people who write books, because it's all public. A lot of it, most of the books are public information, aren't they? And they were paid to do it.
Yeah, former elected officials, when they leave office, pursue all sorts of fill out their career. Never before has anyone, while in office, benefited so immediately and so directly from their elected position like Donald Trump. Sure, there have been people in the past who have loosely traded on their position in government to write a book, to join a law firm, to become a lobbyist. But I think it is unprecedented how obviously the president, while in office, is benefiting from the power he has as president. And it seems unlikely that's going to end whether he wins or whether he loses. He's likely to continue to benefit from this and the properties that he owns long into the future.
You really think that's true? You think that all these people who go to the hotels or things like that, well, he'll suffer some loss because the government won't be paying him, right?
Who pays may change, but I think it's very unlikely that he's going to suffer financially over the long term.
So is the only way we can combat all of this is public financing of campaigns?
Well, that's one way, and I think it's an important way, but I don't think it's the only way. I think there are a variety of forms of transparency that could be incredibly important, especially during this time period. Recognize that unlike the campaign, where we know pretty well who's donating to candidates, that's pretty widely understood. We really don't know who is central to helping Joe Biden plan his transition right now. That period that we're in right now, and also after the election, is largely hidden from view. Most of the rules we have about public information are restricted during that time period. If you wanted to file a Freedom of Information Act request to get all of the information about the Trump transition in 2016, there wouldn't be a judge that would grant that, unlike once in office. And so that's because the rules that we have to provide information to keep government transparent start on Inauguration Day, despite the fact that most of the important decisions happen before Inauguration Day. More transparency during the transition process, during this period, before the election and until Inauguration Day, I think would go a long way to reducing the influence, the pernicious influence of money in politics.
So this all brings back the local votes, the importance. I mean, it's so interesting. You could trace it even to votes in the state legislature, right, that set the gerrymandering and the Census Bureau. I mean, what about the Census Bureau ending the census? We're never going to have really the straight reapportionment. Is that a place to start?
If you want a healthy democracy, you have to know where citizens live. And the best way to do that is to count them. And we use the census in order to do that. And so an effective census is incredibly important this year as it has been in the past. Any effort to make the census work not as well as it has worked in the past is potentially harmful to democracy.
And that will add to the fairness of representation in the Congress, right?
It sure seems so, that if you want people represented, they have to count. And if they're not counted, chances are they're not going to be well represented. Ed Koch, I think, said it well back in the 1980s, that if you don't vote, you don't count. In this case, it's a little different. If you don't count, you don't matter. And for communities across New York City, completing the census, which is sometimes not a straightforward thing, is incredibly important to making sure that every resident of New York voice matters, including citizens and non-citizens alike.
The need to vote is so important, from the very most local office to the very top. Because if you don't have people representing your interests in the state legislatures, then you're going to get regulations that prevent people from voting at the polls and all kinds of things. In your students, how many of them already understand how everything works?
I would say probably not all of them. This is a big task. I think we underestimate how complex we have made the world that we live in. Registering to vote, becoming informed about voting, simply knowing where you are going to be able to vote, how you're going to be allowed to vote, is not nearly as obvious as it should be. And for students who may be residing not where their permanent address is, whose polling place is not the one that they went to with their parents when they were a child, makes it all the more complicated for them. This is a problem because we know if somebody doesn't vote their first time eligible, it's less likely they're going to vote the next time they're eligible. And so that pattern of voting relies on full information and being informed. And unfortunately, most of us, including my students, but not limited to my students, still don't have enough information education on it.
What I also meant, though, was how many of them, when they finish high school, understand the structure of the government and all of the different things that it springs out to control?
You know, I suspect, like a lot of us, we understand the top line, but you'd be hard pressed to find a high school graduate in New York City who could fully explain all of the levels of government just in our state, let alone other states. I think you're hard pressed to find anyone who knows who their city council member is, who their state assembly representative is, and who their representative is in Congress. If you can find on the street somebody who can tell you all those three things, they're probably an elected official, because it's just a rare thing to be that fully informed, and it's understandable, but potentially harmful to our democracy.
When did you first learn about your local elected officials?
Oh, that's a good question. I grew up here in New York, You know, I knew from a very early age who the Brooklyn Borough president was. It was Marty Markowitz. Uh, and I knew that because I met him as a very young child. But outside of Marty Markowitz, I probably couldn't tell you many more people who are involved in local government. And I think that's probably makes me normal, not abnormal. I think that our common knowledge is pretty limited, but I probably learned it right here in New York.
I'm getting so boring because I learned it all basically in junior high school and I guess at home. But I had the most wonderful civics teacher, which is a course that's never taught in a public school. And I think is so important in forming the group of citizens that's going to protect us when we need to be.
Civics education is a massive, massive hole in the standard curriculum in junior high schools and high schools alike. Better civics education, more interesting civics education would be a huge, huge benefit to the health of democracy. And it's something that I would love for a candidate for mayor this next year to run on a campaign only about improving civics education in New York City schools. That being the sole point on their agenda, I think would be a convincing campaign and would be an important one for the future of the city. I suspect that's not going to happen, but I'd like to see it.
All right, we'll have to look for it. Well, any student of yours is very lucky because they're going to learn a lot of things. Thank you very much. And of course, I hope to see you again very soon. Thank you.
I would love it.